Steve's part of a group of people who really pushed the standards and the possibilities, especially in the big, long, terrifying limestone routes around here. So I think it's safe to say that Steve, I think he's one of the most impactful rock climbers in Canadian Rockies history. And he's part of these teams that were extremely bold. And that team of Marshall and Maio were I don't know, for me, that's the pinnacle of our climbing, one of the pinnacles of our climbing history here. Urs might agree. I don't know. Not sure. Um, Steve's also an amazing writer. I remember reading his article, Jimmy and the Kid, back in the 1990 Canadian Alpine Journal. It's the kind of article that makes grown men cry. It's an incredible read. Such good writing. Steve has a few books. All you guys have book tickets. We're going to do some draws later. I don't know. I think I feel very honored that Steve said yes to this. It's an incredible way for us to kick off our slideshows again into the next 10 years, maybe. See how this goes. Guys, can we all welcome Steve DeMaio, please?
Oh, thank you very much, everybody. It's a real honor to be invited here to basically tell stories and we'll look at some slides in my 40th year as a CMC member. And in the couple of weeks after the 65th anniversary of the Calgary Mountain Club. So let's hear it for the best climbing club in Canada, the Calgary Mountain Club. So we're going to get rolling here, and the lion's share of this show is going to be about Big Stone, Calgary Mountain Club members pushing the ragged edge of their capacity on the Big Limestone of the Bow Valley. And we talked about Jeff Marshall. Andrew talked about Jeff Marshall. However, we also have a few of the participants whose pretty faces are going to be up on the screen today, and I'm going to get them to stand up. Bill Betts is here. We have Andy Generu is also here. We also have Mr. Chalk Quinn in the back there. Why don't you give us a wave there, Chalk? So The Ragged Edge is, as Andrew mentioned, it's also the name of the award-winning documentary produced and directed by John Price. And John Price interviewed me. It was a 6-hour interview by him and his cameraman. And, you know, by the end, we were exhausted. We were trashed. We laughed. We cried. Literally, we all cried. And we gave each other a hug at the end. And afterwards, you know, after the documentary came out, people would come up to John and say, John, what the hell was it like to interview Steve DeMaio? And John told me later, he goes, yeah, Steve, I got asked that question a lot. And my answer was, Steve DeMaio is 50% gladiator, 50% philosopher. So you'll have to decide for yourselves. Now, the documentary came out, the family came to watch it in Banff, and the kids, my 2 kids are here tonight also, and my wife, Karen. They watched the documentary, and I said, asking my kids, you know, I said, look, you know, it was a 6-hour interview, and John would cut right to the punchline on some of my stories with no buildup. And I said, I'm kind of worried that maybe I was coming across like a psychopath. And my kids both looked at me and said, yeah, but Dad, you are kind of like that. I'm like, okay, well, so you get to decide after tonight what the percentages of psychopath, gladiator, and philosopher are. Leave it there. So The Ragged Edge is also the title of my latest book that came out in 2025, a collection of my writing from between 2005 and 2025. We're going to cover a little bit about what the book covers tonight, but Whoop, don't have lift. Oh, whoops. Am I too far away? So we are going to cover some of what the book covers. The lion's share of the talk tonight is going to be about CMCers pushing the ragged edge of their capacity on the big limestone of the Bow Valley. I'm also gonna. This is like commercial break. Um, I'm. We're also gonna cover some of my formative experiences. Okay. Do I have control? I'm not a control freak. There. Okay, thank you. I'm also going to cover some of my formative experiences on Canadian limestone and the Niagara Escarpment, and then I'm going to wrap up at the end talking about what the hell happens for all of us as we attempt to pursue the ragged edge of our capacity after our bodies and our brains start to fall apart in our 40s, 50s, and 60s and beyond. This is Jim Fothergill, my very first rock climbing mentor. I met him when I was 14 years old in 1978. He is still climbing today. This is him climbing in South Africa. In 1981, I met John Candorp, and this is John Candorp still on the sharp end in his 60s in Ontario, putting up new routes, ground up. This is John Candorp on a new route on Lion's Head in Southern Ontario on the Niagara Escarpment. Now, the ethos of this era was ground up on site, no pre inspection, and no bolts, period. So, this was the ethos that I first learned to climb on. Now, this is the type of rock feature that exists in Southern Ontario. This is a climb called the Monument, which John Candorp, myself, and Pete Zabrak got the first ascent on. And we spent a long time trying to free it. We were never able to do it. Uh, Ultimately, I left Ontario, and Peter Croft on site flashed this at 512C. So that was the Monument. It's just when I was working the route trying to free it, this is you can tell this is from the 1980s because it's a knotted sling and oval carabiners. Quick draws weren't invented yet in 1984. So this is another climb at Mount Nemo, the north end of Mount Nemo, and I had done the first ascent of this thing called Anathema, and I had taken a hang and finally finished it. So it wasn't a clean lead. To come back the next weekend to do the clean lead, I got the clean lead, clipped the rope into the tree at the top, threw a sling around the tree, and yelled down to my belayer, descending, at which point he took me off belay. And I stepped off the cliff. And you can see here, it's not a small cliff. This is, 60 feet high, steep. And I still, to this day, it is now 41 years later, and I can still see the blur of the rock accelerating in front of me. And I sailed down the crag. Now, in the upper left corner of this, you can see this tree branch. So there was a tree that grew underneath the overhang. It's an overhanging root. There's a branch about 4 inches in diameter. And as I sailed down the crag, horizontal back first, my back hit the branch. This 4-inch branch bent, broke, and I hit the ground on my back behind my partner. And I'm laying on the ground on the only flat spot around. It was jagged rocks all around me. I'm laying on my back on the ground, looking up at my partner. He looks down at me and says, "Don't move." And I looked at him, up at him, and I said, "What the fuck are you doing?" Now, just for the sake of it, that's not me actually swearing. I'm quoting myself from 41 years ago. So if anybody is fussed about that, sorry. But I'm just quoting myself so I'm not actually swearing. And so I sit up and, I'm doing a little dance. I'm like, I am unhurt, except for a few scratches from the tree branch. So in hindsight, I think the rope going through the draws, around the overhang, up to the top, back down, and the tree branch slowing me down saved my life. That was enough friction. I think today it would have killed me for sure. But that saved my life. Saved my life. When I got home that night, my dad told my dad this story. He says, "Well, son, I think you used up another one of your 9 lives today." John Kandorp exploring on the Niagara Escarpment in the early 1980s. So this climb here is called Boulevard Circus, and it was a ground up on site first ascent. This is me after I'd lowered off and getting a belay, and my partner there climbing it. At this juncture, I'm 19 years old. This was the most serious lead on limestone I had ever done. There was basically no gear for 2/3 of the way up the crag until you got your first piece after climbing the crux. Um, and and I had walked underneath this thing 6 or 7 times before I finally summoned the courage to climb it. And it caused a bit of a stir when some folks bolted it into a sport climb, and then they didn't talk to me about it and changed the name, and there was a bit of a sword fight online about that. In any event, I think they changed the name back, but the bolts are still there. This is 1984. This is the garb. Like, this is like leading edge clothing. Got an army surplus sweater. Those purple pants I'm wearing, polyester. And they were my mother's pants that I stole. And those things were bulletproof. And they lasted years. And you know what? They were so flexible. You could roll them up into shorts, you could roll them down when it was cold. And later, somebody said, I'm wearing my mother's pants and a bandana. And somebody said to me in 1986, "Steve, I got you figured out. You have an anti-image image." I'm like, okay, whatever that means. The work socks in the rock shoes. How about that, right? There's another ground up ascent that John Kandorp and I worked on. And we took multiple falls on this thing. John and I both took 10 falls each. The last one that I took, there was a small wire, it was a Chenard Micro with a frayed wire, and we were too cheap to replace it. But I took the fall, and the wire snapped, and the next piece held. But the rock, you can see it's quite good. The rock actually held. The little piece of aluminum was still stuck in the rock. To my knowledge, this route still hasn't been finished. Not sure why. It's another evening at Mount Nemo. Mount Nemo was 8 miles from my mother's house, and I used to ride my bicycle up there when I was a teenager to go rock climbing. This is an evening after work. And one of the things about the limestone on the Niagara Escarpment is you get this fractured limestone and you get these dolomite caps that were really good rock, but didn't have any pro often. And we were no bolts. So I'm up here trying to stitch together something with pins and this and that. And I kind of had developed this technique because bolts weren't allowed. That was a religious belief that we had. No bolts. So I'm up here tapping knife blades in and trying to get some gear. And Pete Zabrock, never one to mince his words, says, Steve, it sounds like you're putting in an awful lot of iron up there. Well, if you think this is a lot of iron, then you get up here and lead this goddamn fucking thing. In any event, that was the style. So the approach was you get to the dolomite cap, and I coined the phrase later, put in the equivalent of a belay. So 5, 6 pieces, but just clip them all into the rope and then run it out to the top. So not far from where this photo was taken, a little bit further north at Mount Nemo, another night with Pete, I'm attempting a similar geometry climb called, I later ultimately was called parental guidance. And you'll find out why in a minute. So I put in the 5 pieces, I clip them all into the rope, and I charge up the thing, but I don't make it. I fall off to take a 20-foot fall. Shake out, try again, a little higher, bang, 30-foot fall. Okay, well, now I'm starting to get frustrated. Okay, go again, 40-foot fall. Okay, you know what? I'm going to take a good shake, and this time I'm going to go for it. So I charge up, I get past my past my previous high point. I'm on 5'8" ground, and I got 2 moves to the top, but I'm pumping out. And I'm hanging on, and it's like, I can't do it. I'm losing body tension. My feet are like I got flippers on. I'm like, oh shit, I'm going to come off. But now I'm so high above the gear. And these cliffs are, 80 feet, 100 feet high. So I'm afraid I'm going to hit the ground. So I yell down to Pete, Pete, take it in. Take it right fucking in. Because I want him to take every inch of slack out of that climbing rope so that I don't hit the fucking ground. And then I yell down, I can feel the rope coming tight on my harness. Then I yell down to Pete, pull me off. And I can still remember, again, 40 years later, when have you ever been on lead, run out that far, and feel tension on the rope pulling downwards? Never happened before or since. Anyway, Pete knew. I can feel the tension, and then I step off. Step off the cliff, and I believe I yelled. The rope came tight and rushed all the air out of me. And I landed 3 feet from the ground. Pete told me later, he's like, Steve, that was the first thing he said was, that's the furthest fucking fall I've ever seen. The first thing he said. Then the next thing he said, that was amazing. The rope came down, it stacked up at my feet, and then it caught. Like, okay. So basically, I fell as far as you could fall at Mount Nemo without killing yourself. This is another great route on the Niagara Escarpment. Really, for me, a personal best. This was graded 511 in the 80s. They upgraded it to 512, which then suddenly got me the sticker of lifetime personal best on site. So, not in the moment, but years later. This is John Candorp on the Niagara Escarpment. It was minus 30. We were bored. You know what? Let's go do that traversing crack at Webster's Falls. So, point of interest, this became the first time I ever attempted to lead and ultimately led A4 on overhanging limestone. So I took above here, I probably took 6 falls right here while my gear ripped out every time. And at one point, again, I had a Chenard micro in blind placement. I'm hanging off it and I step onto it. And of course, because it's overhanging, I lever the lower piece out. And John has this bird's eye view right here. He starts laughing. And he says in this kind of sing-song voice, here we have the Steve DeMaio School of Aid Climbing. And at that moment, the piece I'm on rips, bang, and I take this fall. Anyway, I'll add in that climbing had been recently banned at this cliff the fall before, so we called the route Crimes of Passion. It's also just overhanging stuff on the Niagara Escarpment. This is the type of stuff I grew up on. And just before I moved out west, John Candorp and I did the first girdle traverse of the Skyway Bridge over the canal between Burlington and Hamilton. And you can see here, there's no gear, but we have two 11 mil ropes and we doubled them over because the pro is the girders. So I theorized, well, if one of us falls off and the one rope cuts on a girder, we got a second one. Should be good. Bouldering in the mid 1980s, and is about to head west in my 74 Nova. In those days, John drove a motorcycle, and then I headed across the prairies in 1986. Reg Smart, who you may know, is the brother of Dave Smart, the founder of Gript. He said, he was the one that said, yeah, Steve DeMaio had to move out west because he was taking 100-foot falls on 80-foot cliffs. So I needed more cliff. And we'll hear about that in a minute, where Bill Betts held a legendary fall where I did actually pass him. And tell you what, if the ground was where Bill was, I wouldn't be standing here today. And this is really manifest of our attitude in those days. Is, you know what? You just go until the wheels come off. And if the wheels come off, you get out, you set up your camera. Today it'd be called a selfie. In those days it was a self-timer shot. You set up the camera and you take a self-timer shot and smile. Very quickly, the first person I met when I arrived in Calgary was Jeff Marshall. Second person I met was Bill Betts. In fact, before I met Bill, I was at a CMC party at his house and didn't know it was his place. That's the way things rolled in those days. And very quickly, we were involved in first ascents on Yamnuska and other climbs. Now, Bill Betts coined the phrase. He was the one that made this popular. Yam sits like a finger at the gateway to the Canadian Rockies. And it's saying, if you can't climb me, forget about the rest. So, Astro Yam, yeah, that was Jeff's and my first climb together. This is actually a photo from the team before I arrived, Brian Gross and Brian Wallace, who we'll talk about some more later. But this is on that fateful day, first ascent of Astroyam. The day before, I'd been climbing with Bill Batts and Stu Broker, and we had done Missionaries, Colwall, and Smeagol. And then the next day, I'm climbing with Jeff and Brian on the first ascent of Astroyam. And just while we're here, I'm sitting on this ledge with Brian Gross, and I said, Brian, what the fuck is that? And he said, well, that's our next new route, Steve. Okay. So we'll get to that in a minute. That later became Highlander. I'm going to talk about that. The following week actually became Highlander. So climbing with Jeff and Brian, they introduced me. They were my, mentors. Steve, it's ethical to drill bolts here. So here's Brian Gross hanging from a skyhook, drilling a bolt, and he's smiling. And to me, this was like, oh, this is a game changer. I'm stitching together, coat hangers and pipe cleaners to make something stick, and we're allowed to drill a bolt. And drilling off a hook was this dreamland for me. So I instantly, Brian Gross showed me how to drill my first bolt on Astroyam. There he is finishing the top. And then the next weekend, Bill and I head up on East End Boys. Bill said, I got the, he showed me the line. Bill had actually even been up on it before with another partner. And this is us on East End Boys. This is the second pitch. And that first piece there on the steep wall, there's a couple pieces there. I was standing right there. I tried the move, and it was really hard. It was harder than anything I'd done all summer. It was still early. And I yelled down to, because Bill had said, yeah, it's been freed. It's been freed. It's 510, 510. And I'm like, how hard did you say that was? It's 510, 510. Anyway, it went at hard 511. So that's on the first ascent. And similarly, we were always smiling and laughing, right? There's Bill just having a ball, right? First ascent of East End Boys. So this is looking down the fourth pitch of East End Boys. This is Bill at the station, and it's steep ground, wearing a pack. So Bill's coming up this pitch, and he's laughing, and this is a great climb. And in those days, we all called each other James. Jeff and I called each other James, Chalk, Jeff Marshall, Bill. Andy and I, not so much. We climbed more later. But Bill's coming up. Oh, Jimmy, if you knew how many guys had backed off this thing. I'm like, what are you talking about, you sandbagger? He hadn't told me that all these people had backed off it. So this is looking down the fourth pitch. And when I had led this, I took off from the station. And to me, coming from my background, the challenge was these, the areas of limestone that were blank and there was no gear, but this was a crack line. And so when Bill showed it to me, it was like, okay, you know what? In those days, there was no limestone crack on the planet that I believed I could not get up with a full rack. I'm not saying I'm going to free it, but I'm going to get up the goddamn thing, right? So I'm going up this crack and I'm just cruising. It's like, this is gold. Hand jams and there's a number 4 friend placement way up there. I'm just going to go for that and plug that baby. And I'm charging. There was gear I could have put in, but I don't need it. I'm just charging. And I get up into the fist crack and, both fists are creeping out at the same time. And I got a friend, there's a number 4 friend just below my feet. And they're both creeping out. And I yell down to Bill, watch his ear. And thinking, okay, maybe I can grab the friend on the way by. And they slip out. I go for the friend, miss. And then the number 4 pulls. And I sail down the crag. And I pass Bill. and I am upside down below Bill, and the rope comes tight. And this is only the second time that Bill and I had ever climbed together. So it's sort of like there's that dynamic. We're on new ground. It's very sensitive. You got to be careful. As you know, so I like, is Bill freaked about this? Is like, right? Is he going to think I'm freaked? So I land. I'm upside down. I pull myself up. I look at him and I say, "You okay, Bill?" And then he looks at me and he says, "I'm okay. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay." And then, of course, the friend had slid down the rope. It's at my waist. I unclip it, clip it in my harness, look back up and look at Bill and say, "Well, I guess I better get back up there before I get scared." So off we went. And this is going through the big roof on East End, boys. You can see the tied off knife blades behind expanding flakes. And to me, this was dreamland. This was like I was at my home crags on the Niagara Escarpment. Because I used to go out, aid through these overhangs in winter just for fun. And I was loving this. And 11 years later, Andy and I went back and freed this. And I was worried that this might be 512 and it might be too hard for us. But when Andy went up and cleaned off all the loose rock, there was holes underneath. It was like a miracle. And we put bolts in on there, but he pried off all the loose flakes that I'd had knife blades behind, and there was jugs. So it went at like 11A, which was to me was like a miracle. This Bill taking off, East End boys. The end of a long hard day, and topped off. The next day, I went up on CMC Wall with with Jeff Marshall and Brian Gross, and the you know the stories that had come down with regards to CMC Wall in those days was that the rock is so bad it's like elephants tethered to cornflakes. That was the legend. And of course we went up there and I'm like, this rock is beautiful. This is incredible. And okay, there's some overhanging ground on this river. You're traversing around over. But this isn't overhanging. I mean, East End Boys was overhanging. Um, and as 40 years later, seems Seawall arguably the best route on the mountain. Uh, so great route. Highlander. So this is photo taken subsequent to the first ascent of Highlander. Highlander was a rope solo project that went up the first two pitches of Diratesma and then 5 pitches up and left, just to the right of CMC Wall. This is, and for me, this was and it remains a pinnacle of my psychophysical, emotional, spiritual capacity of my whole climbing career. That this line was completed in 18 hours, car to car, no bolts, and this last pitch, I think it's had 2 ascents. Both of them were by me, and it's only because I advised everybody don't go this way. I had tunnel vision, and I climbed it. I shouldn't have. There was an easier way off to the left, and it's possibly the most amazing finish. It's the most amazing finish on any route that I've done on Mount Yamnuska, because this photo is taken from the top of the cliff. So you got to climb through this overhang to make 2 moves, and you're standing on top. Pretty amazing. The other thing, when I topped out, I had no gear here. So when I did these moves the first time, I probably was run out about 50, 60 feet, rope solo, made the moves, stood on top, and said to myself, fuck me, I pulled it off. And then I picked my way down in the dark. I didn't have a headlamp, picked my way down the back of Yam, back to the truck, drove back to Calgary, filled the bathtub with water, hot water, every everything hurt. Feet, hands. I've got abrasions. Just climbed into the bathtub, and I started bawling like a newborn baby. It was just like, I'm safe now. Okay. Literally bawled for 20 minutes like a baby. So that was Highland. Okay. Above and beyond. A couple of weeks later, um, Brian and I, Jeff was up north, so Brian and I headed up on Above and Beyond. It's just left the Balrog, and this is pitch three, and Brian had put a hook down on an edge right here, and the hook blew, and he took a factor two onto the station and tagged that ledge there on the way by and broke his ankle. So we wrapped off, and this is the days before cell phones. So he slid down down the scree on his butt, and then I carried him back to the truck on my back, and we went to the hospital. Then Jeff and I came back, and Jeff took this picture from the spot where the hook had blown and Brian had taken the fall. By the end of the summer, Brian took his cast off in the bathtub and joined us on the ultimate ascent. And Jeff and I had been up there 5 more times. This was the 6th try when we finally got the thing. And so one guy leads, one guy jumoring with the pack and the little ghetto blaster, and then Brian, he climbed every pitch. Like he just no, I don't want to jumar. I want to climb everything. So he climbed the whole thing. And there he is, big smile on his face. Working our way up the route, and second last pitch, and this is topping off. You can see it's topping off at dusk, and a couple things. Brian was taking ahead of station in, and we could see it was maybe going to be about 5.5 to the top. Jeff and I reached the belay, and Brian just says, "Fuck off, you guys. Just go. Just climb." So Jeff and I climbed up with no gear, the last 50 feet of Above and Beyond, side by side, and we topped out at the same time. It was a beautiful, very special experience. It was around this time when somebody had asked me, "Steve, do you smoke marijuana?" And I said, no, I do not smoke marijuana. Well, why not? My answer was, you knew psychophysical intensity that's required to climb these routes, you would understand that if I smoked marijuana, I'd lose one razor blade thickness of my intensity level, and I could get killed. And they're like, "Oh, Steve, come on. You're too intense." Too intense? Too intense. I'm not too intense. I'm appropriately intense. And the fact that I'm standing here today with 2 good legs and breathing proves it. That's why I don't smoke marijuana. So this is the south side of the Bow Valley, the north facing walls. These 3 walls, rim wall on the right, rim wall, wind tower in the center, and Mount Lougheed. Throw in Hailing. The south side of the Bow Valley became kind of a crucible for me. And this is rim wall. And there's a line that Chalk Quinn and I finished with Jim Savigny in 1987. Took us 2 tries. It was our first attempt. This is Chalk Quinn heading up there, and Jim Savigny. And you can see the rock is conspicuously good here. And on our second attempt, it was raining on and off. and rock's wet, rock's dry. And above here, I'm going to give these are all snapshots in time, remember, but above here is what ultimately became the most serious pitch of my whole climbing career. And I'll get to that in a minute. So there's some dialogue amongst the team as to should we go down, should we not, should we continue, and things like I don't want to bivvy up here with the bad weather, and we get to the base of this pitch, and I had, said, guys, get over here. There's a gully over here. It'll go, it'll go, it'll go. So Chalk and Jim came over, and I start up this thing, but the rock's wet. So I'm drying out the rock with a sock coated with chalk, and I'm tapping in wires like a fucking dentist, trying to get some gear in. And I'm 30 feet out with tied off crap, from the station. And finally Jim's kind of had enough, and he looks up and he says, "Your idea of a gully is ludicrous." And I'm fuck, I'm strung out here. Like none of the stuff's gonna hold. I'm facing a 60-foot factor 2. And I looked down and I said, "Look, can't climb this by myself. I need your support." And Chalk looks up. Jim was quiet. Chalk looks up and says, "Give her nails, man." And that was it. I was charging. And eventually I got some good gear in, but then I had to run it out up this overhanging wall for 35, 40 feet. And I'm going up this wall, and the rock was really good. That was the saving grace. Overhanging, 5'11" ground. And it's like, okay, I think there's a crack up there. If there isn't a crack, I got to down climb because it's going to be a death fall. Thankfully, there was a crack. Carried on. Chalk comes up, and he'd been partnered with Brian Gross and Cheeseman on some of the other routes on Yam over the last few years prior to that. And Chalk says, "Steve, that's the most run out pitch I've ever seen in my whole climbing career." Okay. Oh, thanks, Chalk. Yeah. Carry on. So, a couple of pitches higher, and now we're getting close to the top, but the sun's going down. And so, grab the rack, charge up, and okay, I'm 50 feet up, below an overhang. I got no gear. Sun's going down, and I can't do a blind pull into no man's land through an overlap. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. So I get out my smallest lost arrow, piton, and I stick it in the crack, and it goes in a 16th of an inch. Okay, so I get my rock hammer, and for those of you that don't know, you got to be very careful when a piton's only in a 16th of an inch, because you can hit it and it'll bounce out and just fly down the crag. It's like, so I'm holding my fingers like this around my rock hammer, and it's like, come on, you son of a bitch. Tap, 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 tap. Quarter inch. Tap, 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 tap. Okay, 3/8. Okay, then I choke up on the hammer a bit, right? It's like right at the end, like, careful. Tap, half inch. Tap. Okay, oh, 1 inch. Tap, 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 tap. 2 inches. Okay, now I am Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I am fucking wailing on this pin, and this pin is starting to ring like bing, 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 and I am wailing on this motherfucker, and it goes in, and I clip the draw into it, and I go, yeah, flip it into the rope, and I am Ben Johnson to the top of the cliff. Chalk comes up, and Fader Fortune, Chalk and I don't climb together for 32 years. So we went out recently we're driving out to the crag. Oh, nice to see you, Chuck. Yeah. And we're driving along, and Chuck says, "So, Steve, do you remember that piton on Rim Mall?" I'm like, "Shit, fucking kidding me? I fucking remember that piton." And he says, "Steve, you yelled like a werewolf when you got that thing in and you clipped it. And I heard it going in." He says, "I've got one piton from 50 years of my climbing career on the wall at home behind my desk. It's that pin." I'm like, "You fucker, you have my pin." So Chalk, that pin was as special to him as it was for me. Let's look. Remembrance Wall, High Ling. Bill and I spied this thing, and off we went. Bill and I both had a couple of tries on this thing, and we didn't get it. In those days, Bill had trouble finding helmets that fit. Uh, it's all those brains in there. So yeah, I just if there's any rock fall, you just hide underneath Bill. You're going to be good. Yeah, base of the crux corner. This was the free climbing crux of the route, about halfway up. Um, and here's a failed attempt. You can see I have the same haircut, today that I had then, just for different reasons. This is ultimately Jeff Marshall and I went back the next year and climbed the thing. Now you can see there is bolt up on the wall there, and the previous year I'd gone 2 pitches straight up above there, and it was hard, too hard, bad protection, 5-10 pitches, 45 meters each. Took a long time. They were 3-hour leads, So I got to here in 1987, and I looked up and thought, what would Dave Cheeseman do if he was here right now? Well, Dave would go look around the corner, right, and see if there was an easier way. So I traversed left, and you know what? It was easier. We bagged it. That was the Remembrance Wall. Then later, a couple of years later, the guidebook comes out, and it says, "Oh, Remembrance Wall. It attempts this really bold line, but traverses off to the left." And I'm like, son. And of course, by now, I can't climb that shit anymore. Like, the ship has sailed. So it's too late. I can't even go back. I don't climb at that capacity anymore. But I got it. I don't mind saying I was a little choked. It attempts this amazing line, but traverses left and misses it. So it's one of those things. Top of High Lang, Wind Tower, Iron Butterfly. Took three years. This is our first foray onto the wall. Like, we were thinking we were going to climb it in a day. I got my fucking rock shoes on already. And this is it's not there's some kind of an optical illusion here or not, but it's showing me tilted and the wall vertical. It's actually the other way around. The wall overhangs and I should be vertical. Uh, this wall, after the second pitch, it overhangs for 1,000 feet, and there is not a ledge big enough to set a water bottle on for 1,000 feet. That's the nature of this compact limestone. This was the first pitch on the first foray, and started raining. Jeff came up, and Jeff seconds this pitch, and afterwards he said, "Steve, that's the best lead I've ever seen on limestone, the best rock lead." A great compliment. And that was indicative of climbing with Bill, climbing with Jeff. So much support. there was not a shred of competition. It was all team. This is the pitch above there, working the route. It's the first A3 pitch. I'm told that people back off right about here. That this little bit of free climbing up to where the A3 starts gets tricky, and it does. Jeff starting up the next pitch, another A3, tied off blades behind expanding flakes. Jeff took a bit of a bomb on this pitch, hurt his shoulder. We retreated. We went back up. We broke a driver. We retreated. So it very quickly turned into a siege, and we ended up leaving 700 feet of rope. So it was late August 1987, and Jeff's like, Steve, let's go up on Wind Tower. I'm like, I'm distracted. I got this going on, and I can't go. So he went up with Glenn Reisenhofer, and this is what Glenn had jumared up on the rope. There had been a rock fall, smashed a carabiner, and cut the rope 85% of the way through. So to this day, I wonder if I'd had some ethereal remote viewing experience that put the fear of God into me, that made me uncomfortable at going with Jeff to Wind Tower to do this Jumar for the first time. And I was probably outweighed Glenn Reisenhofer by about 30 pounds, and I would always take a 50-pound pack with me. We'd freight train with the packs. So would that have been enough? Did I have remote viewing? That was my first thought at the time, was that I had some remote viewing experience. In any event, we went back, carried on, and you know what? We were just having a good time. And in all of the climbs that Jeff and I did, all those hard climbs, all the adversity, we never had a harsh word for each other ever, not once. It was all fun, support, and never a raised voice, ever. This is one of the A4 pitches, and just to get across this blank section, I think I took my fifth fall from that spot, stacked pins ripping, looked over at Jeff, said, well, I guess it's a good thing it's me up here taking all these falls. Somebody else might be scared shitless out of their mind. Jeff just laughed. And next pitch, steep, look at this steep, compact rock on Wind Tower. And this leads on Wind Tower, every lead took, 5 hours. So as a blayer, you'd fall asleep at the station. And Jeff was high on this pitch. He's way up here. And I think I'd eaten a whole bag of M&Ms, and I was kind of having a sugar crash, and my eyes were shut. And suddenly I just hear this muffled, I'm in trouble. And start awake, look up, and the geometry here, if he comes off there's this little fin of rock that sticks out. Like, oh, this is gonna be bad. So I yell up, James, and he's spread eagled like this, right? All right. That's not a good place to fall. And he looks over his shoulder and he says, I know. And then he got a hook down and drilled a bolt, got out of it. But it was, that would have been not good. So leave the fixed ropes, hammering it up at the base of the wall after another attempt, and then starting our way back up on the successful ultimately successful ascent. This is getting high on the wall. We're in the upper corner. And last pitch, last day. Clouds below, that's the Three Sisters in the background there, topped out, and Mount Lougheed in the background. So in 1986, Jeff and I had been on Astroyam, we'd been on Above and Beyond, and we were at a Christmas party in this time of year, December, and we shut the party down and we're about to drive home in our cars. And we go outside and, we give each other a hug, and Jeff looks at me and he says, James, I think it's pretty cool that you came out here and, we're doing all this cool shit, but, you can be a little bit pushy sometimes. I'm like, I didn't say anything. I mean, I'm 21 years old, just turned 22. It hurt my feelings. Like, oh, okay. So fast forward 2 full years later, we top out on Wind Tower. We're hiking down the backside. We got the big packs on. We're each in our heads thinking about stuff, going downhill. Jeff stops, turns around, says, "Hey, James." "Yeah." "Do you remember a couple of years ago when I said, I thought sometimes you were a bit too pushy?" "Oh, yeah, I remember." Like, well, you know what? That's one of the things I like the most about you. I'm like, I think we fucking kissed. Like, thanks, James. Oh. So, a month later, we head up to the north face of Mount Lougheed, and this is beginning of August. And I got to this spot and I looked up at the wall. And for the first time in my climbing career, when I looked up at an unclimbed wall, thought to myself, what a fucking piece of shit. I do not want to climb this. But I was with Jeff Marshall and Brian Wallace. And they were tough guys, keen, motivated. And I didn't want to miss out on the first ascent. So I overrode my intuition and we continued. Sadly, Brian Wallace got killed on this day. These are some of the last photos of Brian up beforehand. And when I talk about the ragged edge of our physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual capacity, when I say spiritual, I don't mean religious. I mean something ethereal, like intuition. And so I'd had this revulsion at the base of the wall, and we were climbing up. You can see the walls, it's busted up. And on Jeff's pitches, sometimes Brian and I would take a different line and be behind around a rock buttress and climbing up. And I'm like, okay, I know Jeff led it, but who's around the corner? And I'd traverse over and look around. Oh, it's Brian. It's Brian. Now that is ridiculous. Never happened to me before or since. Today I wonder, had Brian's spirit already left us? I don't know, but I have no other explanation. Brian led up, had a piece in, had a number four friend in, hold busted off. He fell, the piece pulled. He fell below us, disappeared from sight, factor 2 onto the station. Probably an 80-foot fall. So I went, it's like, okay, autopilot. We're yelling, nothing. Okay, drill a bolt, I take the deadline. And you know what? For the young climbers of today, we had never practiced stuff. You got to fucking practice this shit. Because I fucked up. I'll tell you what in a minute, but I took the deadline, clipped it to the bolt, didn't leave Jeff any slack to his stitch plate. Wrapped down to Brian, and he's unconscious. He's still breathing. Upside down, I flip him up. That's when I realized he had a massive head wound. So I build an anchor and I yell up to Jeff, lower him onto the anchor. He lowers 3 inches. And Jeff says, I don't have enough rope. So I'm hanging, and there's not a foothold. We're on a vertical wall. There's not a foothold. It's nothing. I'm hanging there. Okay, what do I do? And out of the mist, I recall a conversation that I had with a climbing partner. Yeah, I took a crevasse rescue course and we did a 2-to-1 and 3-to-1 pulley, pull somebody out of a crevasse. That's what I got to do. So I set up another anchor higher up, built a Z pulley out of carabiners, and hauled them up. That wasn't enough. But to put a second anchor in, this body weight tied off crap on some of the most terrible limestone in the Rockies. I get a second one in, haul Brian up. Right around that time, Brian stops breathing. So I work on him a long time. Jeff's wondering what's going on. Soon it's clear Brian's gone. I yell up to Jeff, and I can hear the pain in his groaning voice. I got him high enough. He could escape the belay. We lowered him down to a ledge. Ultimately, Jeff and I are standing on the ledge. Brian's gone. Jeff says, and it's starting to rain. It's raining. Turned into snow later. We're a long way up the wall. We're 2/3 of the way up the wall. Jeff says, Steve, we got to go down. I said, well, Jeff, we can't just leave him here. Jeff says, Steve, we have to go down. But Jeff, we can't just leave him here. What are we going to tell his mother? Jeff doesn't say anything. And I'm 23 years old. I start crying right there. Jeff says, James, you and me got to go down. Brian's gone. There's nothing we could do. So down we went. That rain turned to snow. By the time we got to the base of the wall right here, it was dark. And this whole thing here is a shale slope. It's steep. And padding up it solo, with no snow on it wasn't too bad. But descending it is a horror show. So we spend the night on the ledge. And the next morning, and I had worn a cotton t-shirt, and I shouldn't have. It was a mistake. I got so cold through the night. And it's one of those things where I should just take the shirt off. When I was so cold and rattling with cold that I didn't have the fortitude to strip down in the snowstorm and throw that fucking shirt into the abyss, which I should have done. By morning, I'm hypothermic. Jeff and I are starting to stir. We got first light. I look at Jeff and say, Jeff, you're going to have to take care of me today. He looks at me. He doesn't say anything. Like, okay, yeah. Later, he said, yeah, Steve, it's every man for himself. So we do one rappel from here to the middle of this shale slope, and there is nothing. Okay, you know what? Cornflakes, bowls of cornflakes is not an exaggeration. With all the experience that Jeff and I had, there was no gear. There was nothing we could get in to do the next rappel. And we tried left, we tried right. Can we traverse off this thing? And Jeff, I kind of climb down and I get onto a little saddle in the shale about the size of one of these square tables. And I'm standing there and I'm looking up, 60 feet away. There's Jeff cutting steps in the shale, 6 inches of snow on it, trying to get across. I'm like, Jesus Christ, am I going to watch my second friend get killed today if he slips? And in that moment, it was like the mist cleared and I had a vision of climbing in the Needles of South Dakota in 1983, 5 years before. And the way you get down off the Needles in South Dakota, because there's no anchors, it's one guy lowers off one side, and the other guy lowers off the other side. I'm standing there on this saddle of shale, and I yell up to Jeff, Jeff, get over here. I got an anchor. I got an anchor. And, he's in the middle of it. Like, this is the real deal. He's like, James, what? There's nothing. I got something to get down here. So he comes down. We're standing there. He's like, okay, what? James, we're going to cut a trench in the back of the saddle, back of the shale, 6 inches deep with our rock hammers. And then we're going to lay the rope in the trench. You're going to go off that side, and I'm going to go off this side. And he's like, okay, but what are we going to do when we get to the bottom? I said, I don't fucking know, but we're going to be 150 feet lower. And okay, so we dig the trench like fucking madmen, and we're staring at each other like, okay, you ready? Yeah, okay, fucking lay it down the trench. It worked. Got down to another bench. That got us off the wall. And to this day, I believe that there was, something spiritual happening in these elements where I was able, in my hour of need, to come up with a solution that I'd never practiced in ever before. That's just a gift. So a month later, Andy Jenneru and I, Jeff Marshall, go back, say, you know what, we got to climb this route as a cenotaph for Brian. So we went back. That's Andy up there, myself. Low on the route, Jeff injured his hand. And later, I got so freaked out that I couldn't lead anymore. So Andy just took over and led us to the top. We're smiling here, but you know what? After that, it was different. You know what? There was still climbs, but it was like the song went out of the birds. It was like trying to play guitar with no strings. It wasn't the same after that. Jeff and I, we did some routes. We did other routes, 1989 and 1990, but this is topping out. This is after a successful climb. So is that. Like, okay, you know what? The song has gone out of the birds. 1990, this ended up being our last climb on Yamnuska. This is Quantum Leap. And Jeff had taken a fall, factor 2 fall from where this photo was taken earlier, broke his helmet open, injured his shoulder. We escaped. We came back. Ultimately, he got the bolt in here. We carried on, and close to the top, it seemed we can't escape this. I leave the station, and the sun's going down, and I get to an overlap, and I got nothing, and I'm 40 feet out from the belay. I got nothing, and there's another overlap. but there ain't a seam. There's not a seam I can get a 16th of an inch of a lost arrow into in this spot. And I get a hook down, and it's crap. So I get a second hook, and I put it down, and I get it in equal tension. And I'm holding on to the wall, and I'm jumping on these hooks to give them the aggressive test, like, oh, you motherfucker. And I jump on the hooks, and they hold. But this is hollow in front of me. So I got to lean over and drill a bolt like this. Tap, 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 tap. And I'm drilling this fucking bolt, and a mosquito lands on my arm. And I'm trying to stay so goddamn still on these hooks, not as though my life depends on it, because my life depends on it. And I get the bolt in. It's dark, but Ben Johnson to the top. Jeff comes up. We're both on top. You know, we're standing there, and we're both safe. Ropes aren't even coiled yet. Jeff's standing there, and I said, "Fuck!" Jeff's like, "What? Steve, what? Like, fuck!" It's like, "Steve, we're safe. We're on top. What? Fuck, this is a serious game." And we went down the next day. You know, I got a desk job. I'm at my desk, and I'm sitting at my desk, and I'm thinking, how much closer can I fucking shade it? Darkness, body weight, crappy hooks, factor 2, fucking ledge fall. If I keep, and you know, it's, if you can deal with it, you will try. If you think you can, you're going to try. But how close can I shave it? You know what? I have to stop. I got to stop. It's going to fucking kill me. And so that was it. I went into retirement from serious climbing, focused on my career. 1999, Karen and I got married. You know, when you've been at the ragged edge of your capacity on these walls, it's like a canvas that you paint the rest of your life on, but it's always in reference to the canvas. So here we are, dancing below Maio. In 2005, I started to put my thoughts together in a book, The Rage, Reflections on Risk, scratching the surface of the psychophysical capacity. And in the early 2000s, you know what? There's 2 kids. Here we are. Family, rim wall, wind tower call, and painting new memories on the canvas. And for me, watching new memories, kids running around with glee at this amazing place. 2011, published Suicide Wall, which is my first work of fiction. And it's the main character is a rock climber who has to ultimately free solo the last pitches of a new route between Above and Beyond and Astroyam in order to foil a terrorist plot that's going to blow up strategic infrastructure in Alberta. And that my daughter took this photo when she was like, 10 years old. That's me jumping off of a swing set or something in the park. The 2010s, the 2010s, I took up single-handed sailing. And this is really when I started to tap into the spiritual elements. And some of that's hammer and anvil type stuff. You know, when you leave your wife and your 2 young kids crying at the airport to go offshore sailing by yourself, you know what? It's not coffee shop philosophy anymore. So it's still a good idea. You're mumbling to yourself. It's still a good idea. Still a good idea. Uh, Ultimately, single-handed down to Cabo San Lucas. Um, I will say, sailing. I've been the most afraid of my whole career of adventure was sailing, not rock climbing, which is saying something. 20 teens, Lake Okanagan. I started working on this traverse, rock climbing traverse. And you know what? It was fun because it was low commitment. You having a bad day, whatever, you know what? You jump off in the water and swim home. Like, this is dreamland, but it's, amazing climbing. And so I was working on this thing, and of course, my body's starting to fall apart. I got hip pain 24 hours a day. I got torn rotator cuffs, and I'm working this thing, and I'd come back, to the to the cabin where the kids are, and oh, Dad, how did it go out on the rock today? Well, you might say I was exploring the ragged edge of my capacity. And so that's kind of where I coined that phrase. And so after a while, I'd, spend an afternoon out on the crag and come back to the cabin, and the kids would say, Dad, how did it go on the ragged edge today? Not too bad, not too bad. Of course, the this was my hip, 24-hour a day pain, and that's my new hip. And of course, going through physio, it's sort of like, okay, the first weeks, I can walk 100 yards. And, my daughter, she's like, so Dad, you know, how's it going? How is it for you? You're not being able to do what you used to do. And I said, well, Steffi, I went 100 yards yesterday, and today I'm going to try to go 120. So I'm at the ragged edge of my capacity, and that's always a good day for me. So I'm doing this physio, and I'm, hiking. Pretty soon I'm hiking kilometers. I'm at Edworthy. I'm, hiking kilometers, and I gotta make these workouts harder. I want to climb something. And I'm like, should I go to the climbing gym? Oh, good, but I like being outside. So I started climbing the Douglas fir trees in Calgary. And so this is me on a first ascent, climbing a Douglas fir tree. And this became an addiction, I don't mind telling you. I would go out in snowstorms, minus 25 by headlamp. And you know what? I'm just loving it. I ended up coining it my urban adventure workout. And so early on, yeah, it's the hiking. And near Edworthy, there's some old quarries there. Ah, okay, this is what I'm talking about. Yeah, baby. But there's not much of this until, finally I look up. I'm like, I'm in the easternmost stand of Douglas fir trees in Canada. You know what? Just do it. So I started climbing the trees. So I now have over 160 trees in Calgary that I climb, 8,000 feet of up climbing, 16,000 feet, if you include down climbing, because you got to climb down. Uh, and I published the tree climbing mini guide. They're all locations, grades, names. 160 trees, 16,000 feet of tree soloing. No. So I use the YDS Yosemite Decimal System to grade them, but you could say it's a T grade. It's a T10, it's a T7, you know. Um, Broadly speaking, I've had my buddies like, Steve, how do you grade a tree? Well, let me tell you. So, and Of course, this was my first ascent this century out at Yemnuska, right here. But it was a tree. And sometimes you just got to climb a tree because it's beautiful, just like a rock climb. And 2025, it's my two adult kids, Joseph and Stephanie, 22 and 26. We're standing at the base of Suicide Wall. And you know what? If it wasn't for my climbing mentors and Brian, I wouldn't have been standing there with them that day this summer. So I'm grateful to all of my mentors. Some of them are in this room today. And again, when you pursue the ragged edge of your capacity on these limestone walls, it becomes a canvas that you paint the rest of your life on. And a lot of our experiences are in reference to that canvas. And here's Karen and I at Yemnuska, this 2025. I still do a little bit of climbing on rock, not just trees. But you know what? I'm too afraid to climb on Yam now. You know what? It's just too hard. It's too scary. It's too dangerous. And this was yesterday. I was on a first ascent of a new tree down at Crow's Nest Pass. Just hashtag loving it. That's all, folks. Thank you very much. Been a great audience. May all of you only find bliss at the ragged edge of your capacity and flow like states. Thank you very much.